Since numerous probes have crashed on the moon since lunar exploration began, it is apparent that something weird is occurring there. Would you believe me if I told you that the moon is one of the most dangerous places in space? Nevertheless, China, Russia, NASA, and the Indian Space Agency are all continuously launching new missions to the moon. NASA's plans are big. After 2024, humans are to land on the moon again for the first time in almost 45 years and examine the Earth satellite in detail for the first time. But if we look at the record of the moon missions, we have to fear for the safety of the astronauts. It was only in the summer of 2023 that the Russian Luna 25 mission crashed into the moon and shattered. Many experts agree that space travel is currently far too behind and unsafe to send humans to the moon. Some of you will probably argue that NASA sent almost a dozen astronauts to the moon in the 1960s and 70s and brought them back safely, but experts agree that the space capsules were safer and more solidly constructed in those days than they are today. With the loss of the Space Shuttle fleet, NASA has already had to admit that it is no longer competitive from a technical and above all a cost-performance point of view. In short, good and safe space travel has become too expensive. Does this mean that all plans to colonize the moon are in jeopardy? If we look at the record of failures, that could be exactly the case. The great successes are deceptive. Successful projects such as the Apollo flights are cited as prime examples of lunar research, but hardly anyone knows that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin almost lost their lives on their approach to the moon. If Aldrin had not been such an outstanding pilot, the Eagle space shuttle might have been lost. However, the billions of people watching on television only got to see the parts of the lunar premiere that were a success. The first mission to carry a moon car, Apollo 15, was launched in 1971. The world was ecstatic to witness the astronauts tearing through the lunar dust in the lunar vehicle. However, the fact that Apollo 13 nearly claimed the lives of all three astronauts was already forgotten. Other outstanding accomplishments of lunar research included the Russian probes Luna 16, Luna 20, and Luna 24, which were the first to bring soil samples from the moon to Earth in the early 1970s. The successes of these missions were widely publicized, but what about all the miserable failures? The last moon missions went extremely well once more, even though NASA succeeded in 2009 with the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, and the Indian Space Agency had successfully launched a probe into lunar orbit with Chandrayaan-1 a year earlier. These two exploration spacecraft avoided the moon, orbiting it safely. Despite all of these accomplishments, landing on the moon is still regarded as challenging and dangerous. When the Indian subsequent mission failed, they also had to discover why these missions had failed. The first effort to send a probe to the moon was the Soviet Luna mission in 1959. However, communication issues caused the project to fail and the probe to never reach the moon. Between 1961 and 1965, NASA's Ranger program launched a number of probes to the moon. The first 6 of these either crashed there or failed to relay back to the Soviet Union. It was pure luck that the astronauts returned safely to Earth after an ordeal of 6 days in the much too small landing module. The Indians were also hit hard because after the good luck with the Chandrayaan-1 orbiter, the follow-up mission in 1970 put all 3 astronauts in mortal danger when an oxygen tank exploded. The Luna mission in 1969 failed due to technical problems and crashed on its way to the moon. We have already mentioned Apollo 13, the famous Houston we have a problem mission in 1970. The goal of Chandrayaan-2 was to send a lander and a rover to the moon in 2019, but the twin probe collapsed after encountering difficulty landing on the moon. These kinds of mishaps don't just happen. The moon is regarded as a risky place for space travelers and should not be taken lightly at all. One risk factor that is difficult to calculate is the moon's irregular gravity. Because of its uneven mass distribution, the moon's gravity varies depending on where on the surface. Because of these irregularities, space probes and landing modules must land safely. The most well-known example of a successful moon landing despite irregular gravity is the Apollo 11 mission in 1969. However, as was previously mentioned, astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had significant difficulties landing on the moon because the automatic control system failed, forcing Aldrin to navigate. Although the May Tranquilitas moon landing is today regarded as a space exploration masterpiece, few people are aware of how near this achievement was. Uneven gravity was another challenge faced by the Soviet Luna 1959 and 1969 missions, as both probes collapsed during landing. Uneven gravity is still a risk that will be challenging to evaluate for upcoming moon missions. Another risk factor is that, unlike Earth, which has a dense atmosphere, there is no air resistance on the moon, so spacecraft and probes must create their own deceleration during the landing approach in order to land gently. The Eagle lander used a thruster in 1969 to reduce speed and perform a controlled landing. But there have also been unsuccessful landings because of the difficulty of the lack of air resistance, including the Soviet Luna 1959 landing module and the Indian Chandrayaan-2 mission in 2019. The third difficulty that makes landing probes on the moon challenging is communication limits. Landing due to a malfunction with the braking mechanism. Communication with probes on the moon is difficult due to the long distance and light line of sight to Earth. Again, the prime example of successfully overcoming this challenge is NASA's Apollo 11 mission in 1969. During the landing approach to the moon, the command module was in orbit around the moon out of the direct line of sight of the lander. This meant that the astronauts on the lunar module Eagle had to act autonomously in order to land safely due to the communication delay of around 1.3 seconds. The Soviet Luna 15 mission was less fortunate in 1969. For example, the probe was supposed to land on the moon, collect samples and return to Earth during the descent to the lunar surface. However, there were communication problems that led to the probe being lost. The Indians were also aware of these pitfalls. That's why they equipped the Chandrayaan-3 mission, launched in 2023, with a fully automatic landing navigation system. The whole nation was thrilled when the probe touched down successfully and softly on the moon at the end of August 2023. Unfortunately, the Indians were unlucky because after a few days of research work, the 14-day and freezing cold lunar night dawned. The two landing modules were put into a dormant state and could not be reactivated afterwards. It is very likely that both probes froze to death, as the Indians had somehow forgotten to install a heater with temperatures of 100 degrees during the lunar night. This would have been highly advisable, but this is by no means the end of the lunar mysteries. Another factor that makes it challenging for probes to land on the moon is its surface's composition. The moon's surface is made up of craters, rocks, and uneven terrain. The rocks can occasionally be extremely jagged or razor sharp. While the moon dust appears fluffy, light, and welcoming, there are risks there as well because it contains tiny, razor-sharp particles in addition to being extremely allergic. The enormous temperature swings are the final factor that makes the moon a true challenge. On the moon, the sun burns regionally for 14 days straight, causing temperatures to fluctuate between 173 degrees Celsius at night and 127 degrees Celsius in the sun. These extreme temperature conditions pose a challenge for the probes, as their highly sensitive measuring sensors and camera systems have to withstand a lot of what the Indians have now suffered. Russia has also felt the effects of these extreme temperature conditions bitterly. There are now about a dozen broken lunar probes on the moon, which together are probably worth $1 billion. Will the moon eventually belong to the Chinese? The Soviet Luna 22 mission successfully landed on the moon, but like Chandrayaan-3, did not survive the extreme cold conditions on the lunar night and failed after only a short time. The Chang'e mission is a component of the Chinese lunar exploration program run by the China National Space Administration, CNSA, and all of its previous missions have been completely successful. 2009 saw the lunar orbiter Chang'e 1 map the lunar surface and gather a plethora of scientific data. After a year, Chang'e 2 completed the mapping and paid a visit to the asteroid 4179 to Tat-Tiz. In December 2013, as part of Chang'e 3, the first Chinese rover made a lunar landing. Chang'e 4 was the first mission to arrive on the Moon's far side in 2018, and Chang'e 5 followed in 2020, discovering rare isotope helium-3 in vast water reservoirs in the lunar dust. China is now the first country to send probes to the Moon without experiencing any problems. This indicates that, out of all lunar missions, the Chinese have unquestionably had the greatest record. What have we learned about the Moon despite the disappointments and painful setbacks? The Apollo missions were a turning point in space travel, and the astronauts collected priceless samples of lunar rock that allowed scientists to piece together the Moon's geological past. Seismometers were also installed on the Moon's surface during the Apollo missions, recording moonquakes or moon shakers, which gave scientists insights into the Moon's geophysical characteristics and interior structure. The discovery of water ice on the lunar surface by Chandra may first one day aid in the supplying of lunar communities. Additionally, fuel and air can be produced from the water for lunar reconnaissance. NASA is continuing with its plans to send humans to the Moon again in spite of the risks, so all of the data that Orbiter collected, including the fact that the Moon lacks a global magnetic field despite having local magnetic anomalies, will be used to establish the foundation for the Moon's colonization. To ensure you never miss an amazing video, subscribe now.